Blessed love and peace. Today, we share a public service announcement with blessed love and peace and truth and compassion. It is a public service announcement that few on this earth can say and live to see the next day. I may be one of those who can. I may not be. By the grace of the Most High Elohim, I will. So, with blessed, honest love and peace, this is the public service announcement. This is directed specifically to black women who are United States citizens. The message is, shut the fuck up. You are beautiful. You are naturally beautiful. Let your natural hair grow. Let the makeup and costumes of oppression, downpression, plantation go and be yourself. You are children of God, children of the Most High. You are daughters of God, daughters of the Most High, Elohim. The Spirit of God exists within you. And shut the fuck up. With all due respect, the deepest of respect and honesty. You go to Brother Noop of blessed memory because he tells you to shut the fuck up in a smooth, silky, pimpish kind of way. Very intellectual and sharp. You go to Brother Kwanzaa because he tells you you are naturally beautiful, but he doesn't tell you to shut the fuck up. Brother Kwanzaa, peace be with him. Brother Noop tells you to shut the fuck up, but he does not tell you that you are naturally beautiful. He does not tell you to let your hair grow natural and be your spirit self. Few have the propensity to say both. You don't go to me because I'm a piece of shit and I walk with God. For better and for worse. And I say this because it is needed. You need it. The world needs it. Black women who are citizens of the United States, shut the fuck up. Stop prostituting, promiscuizing, and selling out yourselves. Stop prostituting, promiscuating, and selling out our culture. Stop prostituting, promiscuizing, and selling out our children. Stop prostituting, promiscuating, and selling out our men. Stop traveling the world with greed, hatred, and delusion attached to the United States. Stop dropping bombs and shooting guns and killing people around the world in the name of the United States. With collusion in the United States. Stop raping, pillaging, and torturing the world. Period. And particularly, stop raping, pillaging, and torturing the world, and then falling back into the victim trope and thinking to yourselves that there's some escapism from the consequences as long as you blame somebody else and call out iniquity in Babylon. Shut the fuck up. Stop raping, pillaging, and torturing the world. Returning into the folds of the American dream and the American beauty. Claiming victimhood wherever we are. And then floss in the whips and the chains and the trappings. Shut the fuck up. You are a linchpin in this life. The world is in unprecedented crisis. Ain't nothing new under the sun, including unprecedentedness. And here we are, and you are a linchpin. Because so few on this earth today can say anything to you. They see it, they know it. They're crying out, but they can't say anything. Black man saying, oh, he must have had his Wheaties today. He's full of himself today. Look at him, if they're paying attention at all. But he's not going to say it because the black man is so close, the black man in the United States particularly, so close on the verge of death. One of the few things that's keeping him in this life is black woman. By the whims and wills of the black woman, who herself is enslaved to white man. Very precarious situation. So the black man who's on that verge, because he's so corrupted already, he's done his dirt. He spent himself up virtuously in this life. He's seen further about the game in the young days, in the strong days, ego and invincibility. But then eventually, as life progresses, seeing, oh, hold up, that don't last too long. And the way that the lasting is long is boring discipline on the daily and knowledge. And it ain't easy, particularly when one is already snared in intoxications and other types of escapes. And so relying upon that primal relationship and little else, and having to do whatever the whims and wills of the black woman says. And if he speaks up, says, I don't know about that, fine. There's another one on the verge. The white man ain't gonna say too much because he himself is similar. And for him to call out the black woman, he has to call out himself. Because what the black woman is doing is very much attached to what the white man is doing and the white woman. So all snared in the guilt. So we're not going to call each other out. In the meanwhile, there is deterioration and there's desperation across the board. And there is the need for truth and calling out, and balance and compassion and commitment. Black woman, African woman. The depths of civilization are rooted and girded within your fabric. There is necessity for integrity. When there is the settling within the salacious, it's trouble. We need greenity, healthy, natural medicine, natural women. That is the public service announcement at this moment. Juma is approaching, and I am immersed immediately precedingly within the scriptures of the Buddha, whilst listening to traditional world music and instrumentational with some Robert Nesta and Burning Spear in the mix. Studying within Tobadi Gokadao, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, Digha Nikaya, Gospels, Quran, and Tao Te Ching. And at the moment specifically within, as I mentioned, the Holy Scriptures of the Buddha, Digha Nikaya specifically. It is heavier, it's weightier because it involves celibacy. It involves monasticism. I'm not a celibate monk. The teachings, though, and the narratives, the stories, the scriptures are long and repetitive because that's the nature of the monk. Quietude, repetition, meditation, mantras. It's difficult for the householder to do because it takes time. Can't do this and have a job and tend to children and protect the household and everything else. That's why it's the monk life. But to gain the wisdom, to gain the insight, it requires some approximation, some approach towards that devotion. And there are intermediary stages of the householder that are further proximate, where the collective is further quiet, reserved, repetitive, boring, devoted. We see this in Jaini, we see this in Israel, we see this in the Khalsa, and further. We also see, this is where the world is going, towards the Buddha, towards that wisdom, towards that peace, where all the differences are optimally calmed in the mind and in the body and the heart and in the spirit, where all those vendettas and blood feuds that are thousands of years old, that exist, live and breathe today, are calmed. It's not within the Benedictine discipline. that's kind of towards it. The Buddha goes further. And the world is migrating in that direction. Civilization is migrating in that direction at this moment for the answers, just naturally, organically. That's just what it is. So all the politics, all the kshatriyas, all the kings and plutocracies and everything else have to adjust accordingly. It's not us. It's not our will. It's the way the Most High is working. It requires study, it requires honesty, honest investigation of what this is. And that's part of the challenge. Now we're getting to our whole spiel now. However, here it is. Many of the trappings of those religions that proselytize. People say Buddhism proselytizes. Yes and no. It's different than Abrahamic methodologies, even concerning Baha'i. The challenge with particularly Islam and Christianity and Judaism is that each one provides each religiosity. The teachings don't, ultimately, the teachings don't approve of, but the religiosity accepts slavery. So that's always acceptability for the foreigner as well as for the practitioner. And part of the challenge in proselytizing, in convincing somebody, trying to bring somebody onto the fold, is that involves also telling that person to let go of everything else they have in life. The relationships, everybody else, they're going to be a bad influence. And there's a certain legitimacy within that. However, when a person does that, letting go of family, this and the other, if not absolutely, then significantly, the person becomes significantly dependent upon the fold within the religion, the organized religion. That is a type of servitude. Oftentimes, the person does not have economic means to support themselves. And so it means literally where they live, what they eat, if they can marry or not, depends upon the discretion within the religiosity. And to be able to defend oneself, to advocate for oneself, to say, I should get further than this, or I should be able to marry such. There's less of a knowledge of authority within that particular tradition to effectively argue against those who know much further about the tradition than the proselyte. So it's a form of servitude. It is enslavement. And the severity of that enslavement differs. Usually people who are significantly independent have less of a need or motivation for getting involved or converting to a tradition. It's usually people who are actually either like on the straights. Actually, it's people who are spiritually striving one way or the other. The experience of the economic destitution can vary because there are rich people who are in spiritual straits. There are poor people who are in spiritual straits. There are people who are in spiritual straits who become poor in that process, or just because that's the nature of the spiritual aspirant, is one that's away from the material components. There's the eventuality and the necessity of attaching to others in society, in civilization. There's the necessity of cooperating somehow, some way, in a formal way, with some type of collective. And then in that connection, in that cooperation, there's some type of higher and lower subordination. So in each of the religions, that's part of the challenge, is that that experience, that phenomenon of servitude, which is essentially enslavement, exists. And because it exists, when people are offering, and again, it exists within Judaism. Judaism at the moment doesn't proselytize. But particularly Christianity and Islam, slavery is permitted in both. Slavery is historically practiced pervasively in both, and both go out to proselytize. And so there is an intrinsic susceptibility of imperialism within both. And that susceptibility of imperialism fundamentally undermines the very foundation of the teachings within both, within each. It's not what Jesus does. We can talk about the Sunnah, but even the Sunnah talks about a deen that goes beyond what is shared within the Quran. And Jesus talks about this with Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Quran refers to this as well. Basically, the fact that people aren't ready for the higher truth. Sri Krishna says this in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. There's one teaching of oneness of the universe that's extremely difficult to live. And it's not a oneness necessarily of monasticism, although that's essentially what Sri Krishna is referencing. And then there's another teaching of just being virtuous as much as one can be, and living a basic premise of ethics in this life. So there's the duality of the teachings. It exists within Israel, with the Levim and the Israelim. So in the Kohanim, in the Israelim. So there are allowances within the aggregate of each community that allow for the abrogation of truth, and to prostitute to solicit somebody to join in that is a solicitation essentially into servitude, which fundamentally undermines the honesty within the religiosity, because then it becomes a numbers game. It becomes an accumulation game. How many people can we proselytize? How much money can we get in? How much zakat? How many tithes and otherwise can we get in? And it's all utilized. It can all be utilized for benevolent purposes, whether it's building further houses of worship, even doing soup kitchens and otherwise. However, it's another form of imperialism. And as we observe history, we see how this religiosity with the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and the Roman Empire fuse together, where it's blurred. There's a non-differentiation between the two. And we can talk about division of church and state or otherwise. That's an American thing, not a Vatican thing. It's not even a Protestant thing. But even then, that's actually a different story. But similarly within Islam, how much even after the ascension of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the division, the competition, the rivalries, the abrogations, the breaking of the violation of the Sunnah, the violation of the Quran, the violation of Deen, immediately from rip. So, and then to solicit somebody to join into that, when traveling the world, when we're traveling to new lands, with the intention of essentially conquest, that's imperialism. That's not spirituality. So that's part of the challenge that people have today in responding and hearing it at this very moment, because even with the smile and even with the soft raiment and soft clothing, people see behind that smile there's violence. Behind that smile there are chains, and there's chains, and then there is violence if one refuses those chains. The imposition of jizya, and my pronunciation is wanting, but the taxation for even those who do not accept Islam, that is a false premise when the establishment of the order is through unjust means. It's not the Ummah is not providing the service of righteous order of a society when it's coming in and conquering and then demanding tribute or death. That is oppression. Where does and this is an honest question, where does the Sunnah, where does the Sunnah? I could say where's the Quran. I'm thinking of the law though, fiqh and otherwise. Where does Islamic law, put it like that? Because Islam is another thing. Islam is another thing. But the earthly law from Islam, and there's words for that. There are many different words for that, many different concepts and nuances. But where does that? How does that differentiate between oppression and slavery? It's fundamental, an honest question, and it's necessary for the Ummah to answer as this next era of civilization emerges. East and West, because the same game don't work in the East. East doesn't have the same susceptibility towards imperialism that exists within the Eastern West. Again, so we're talking about, in that sense, Asia. East Asia does not have the same susceptibility towards imperialism that the Middle East does. Europe and Africa are the polarities, the equator and the polar extreme. That's a primal experience. Doesn't and again with both of those sides, the tendency is not to enslave and not to torture. The tendency, well, the tendency of the middle grounds is to torture and enslave. No. Let's be mindful before we be too hasty. The tendency, I'll reference, this is something that's recently discussed in previous conversation with kinfolk. What I'm basically bringing in here is the difference between black culture and white culture in terms of predatoriness, and recognizing that the tendency, generally speaking, is that white culture meaning white forms of predatoriness, imperialistic, particularly white imperialistic predatoriness, tends to emphasize torture and enslavement. It doesn't want to necessarily kill people. It needs people to do the work. And if people are disobedient, it's torture, so that even if that person is killed, a lesson is being sent to everybody else that they better obey. So it's torture and it's enslavement. Within black-based imperialistic predatoriness, it's not as much torture and enslavement. It's increasingly the emphasis of just injury and death. Plain and simple. Ain't got time to be worrying about all these games, whatever. Either if this person's too much of a threat, causing too much static, dead. And if it's like they're not causing static, but they could, and we gotta watch them, but we don't got time to do everything else right now. Cut off a limb, do some other type of injury to limit the ability of get back. So, anyways, that's what we observe, particularly within the past few centuries. The Middle East the middle grounds is increasingly entrenched within enslavement. That's pretty much the game. And then there's the propensity of conquest and killing in drastic measures. However, the main thing is using people against themselves, and getting a small part of it, getting a small percentage in the process. The nature of imperialism is evolving. There's less of the necessity of standing militaries per se. Those can be mobilized quickly. There's the necessity of some basic presence and occupation and reminders here and there. But in terms of like just going off and conquering, that's less of the tendency, at least in this past century. It might reemerge, depending upon how things go. But anyway, all that being said, in the past few centuries, in the whole thing of the Crusades and particularly the Ottoman Empire and otherwise, it's been a kind of land conquest, of accumulating land, and then establishing order, and then demanding tribute. East Asia has less of that history in that susceptibility. And there's a differentiation. It's beneficial to recognize the difference between how Asia, particularly East Asia, there's a difference between East Asia and South Asia, but there's a very strong congruence as well. Particularly recognizing the Buddha comes from South Asia and significantly influences and immerses within the culture of East Asia as well. And recognizing how amidst East Asia's established religiosity and spirituality before the introduction of the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, there's Taoism, there's Mohism, there is the teachings of Kongzi, and additionally Confucianism. So, and that's just within China. So there's an established religiosity. When the teachings of the Buddha are introduced over 2,000 years ago, after thousands of years of civilization in East Asia already, it is gradually immersed and fuses, like for better and for worse, fuses, or I can say ebbs and flows. It fuses within the culture, and so there's an intrinsic acceptance, a long time acceptance that's just different than the experience of Christianity within Europe. And my personal experience of that of Buddhism within East Asia is very modest. Yet from what I do experience, that is what is observed of what I can articulate personally. And so it's something to be mindful of as the world migrates towards Buddhism at this moment, to observe what the relationship is of Buddhism within East Asia, and what that portends for the rest of the world at this moment as it migrates towards the calmness that the Buddha provides amidst the pluralism, amidst all the differences. So that's that. Now, that being said, again, there's a difference between the relationship that East Asia has, and this is East Asia specifically, that East Asia has compared to Europe and European nature and civilization, and then the differences in relationship that East Asia has towards the Mediterranean, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. There's a differentiation, there's a distinction, because the culture of Europe, Northern Europe particularly, we're talking about the indigenous. We're talking about what people could call the pagan or otherwise. It's a similar culture to China. China has the colorism and values the light skinnedness of mindfulness and cold and thinking, but at the same time it retains this filial piety that is distinct from. It's actually not distinct from European. European also has filial piety. It's the European imperialism that lacks the filial piety. But that's imperialism that is transported from the Middle East, particularly through the precepts of Judeo-Christianity and the original sin doctrine and devaluation of traditional family and procreation. And then also the Republic, Greco-Roman politicism, and the whole deprivation and corruptions that exists with that. We're getting into Juma now, so I have to go. So point is this: observing European civilization and the advancement of technology, the wheels turning very fast, but at the same time, and it's nonstop. And as many tremendous advantages that are gleaned from those capabilities of utilizing mathematics and knowledge that comes from the middle grounds and processing it like nobody's business. The flip side of that is that there's no shut-off switch. The shut-off switch is very difficult to find. And in the meanwhile, it becomes uncontrollable. And one of the ways of shutting it off effectively in Northern European culture is intoxicants, getting drunk and forgetting, having sex and losing oneself accordingly, eating meat and whatever one wants, and just being hedonistic, and being able to afford it because we wake up the next day and go back to work and nobody knows how to do it like us. And there's a work and stack it up, but then eventually there's now we gotta shut off and just go crazy. Somebody be sober and be the designated driver, because we about to lose it for a minute, and then we can come back, God willing. So that's European culture. Asian culture that we observe has similar nature and similar tendencies of, again, that cold water culture, but at the same time doesn't get as distant as white culture does. And there seems to be an intrinsic knowledge. There's an emulation of white culture, and even perhaps a certain envy. And it's somewhat of a catch-22 within, say, if we're going to reduce all this to color, there's a catch-22 within yellow culture, because yellow culture very much values white culture within itself as a differentiation from other cultures around. Orange, brown, meaning from Southeast Asia, from South Asia, and additionally. So there's a strong colorism. But at the same time, once being introduced, like, oh, here are Europeans, and they're lighter than we are. They go further than we are. They go to the stars quicker and faster than we do. And we can probably ever expect to. So there's a calming of those ambitions of just being as white as one can be, or as white as yellow can be. And in that recognition, there is that retention of filial piety, and a checks and balance, an intrinsic checks and balance, so that it's part of the culture. So all that being said, point is that where the white culture, and this is very crass reductions type of terminologies. However, in white culture, there is like fast, hyper speed, and then crash for a second or however long, and then get back on. In that crash, that's where the shifts become helpful, because it's one person's turn to crash and everybody else will take responsibility, whatever else, and then pass the bone. The president, four-year cycles of the United States and otherwise. And it's very difficult for any other group to keep up with that. However, there are vulnerabilities, there are weaknesses to that. And one of the advantages that exists within quote-unquote yellow culture from East Asia is that it may not be as fast and it might not be as long, but it's very strong and it's very long and it's very fast. And there is an increasing intrinsic or less susceptibility to the crash, or a less severity, because East Asian culture crashes too. It still does the drunkenness, still does the meat, still does the sex, but to a lesser degree, to a less severity than in Northern culture. And so, because of that, the tropes, the troughs, the ebbs and flows are not as high, not as erratic and volatile. So there's an increase. Balance continually, even though the extremities are not as, or the speed or whatever are not as further as European culture. So in the long run, particularly at the moment, there are advantages amidst the recent disadvantages, historically and civilizationally speaking, in recent generations and centuries. So I guess the basic point of that is that there's a further amount of balance within the East Asian methodology of civilization than within the Northern European methodology of civilization. Now, with respect to East Asian civilization and Mediterranean civilization at the moment is so woefully attached to imperialism and science, secularism, the weaponry, methodologies of production, communication, otherwise. So at the moment, Mediterranean religiosity is not itself. It's very distant from itself as a whole, as a collective. And so it's very compromised in terms of working or fighting in one ways. And when there is that facade or that surface level of fighting, it might be in the name of certain things, but it's not those certain things. So the secularity itself, the secularism, science, and further, the kinfolk, the young people of science, are migrating further towards the Buddha. Because again, science is not the answer. The youth are searching for answers beyond what science can provide. And there's enough knowledge to know that they're not getting it from Christianity, they're not getting it from Judaism per se, they're not getting it from Islam, they're not seeing it particularly, and that's the thing. It's there, it's within Islam, it's within the Quran, it's within the Gospels, it's within Jesus, it's within Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it's in Moshe Rabbeinu and the Torah, but it's not seen in the actions of the leaders and the scholars and the practitioners, the devotees of such. And so the corruptions are limited, and there's the continuing migration towards truth, and there's the truth exists within the Buddha, the truth exists within the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads in the Vedanta, as it does in each of the other traditions I mentioned. It exists within Tao, it exists within the Tao Te Ching and the teachings of Confucius. Yet there's no perfection across the board. Um, Much of world imperialism in the past few centuries is significantly based within Abrahamic traditions. And so there's a natural balancing where the masses are further knowledgeable and literate in the teachings and the hypocrisies of Abrahamic traditions. And now that is less satisfactory as a whole, as a collective. I'm gonna wrap this up. So there's a natural migration towards finding solutions, being further literate, simply just literate. And this is European students. This is European teenagers. This is white American teenagers. And additionally, okay, yeah, I know the Jesus thing. I know, with all due respect, this is how it's reduced because this is how it is taught. And so wait, what's going on over there? That feels that does. I don't feel so much like that weight and that imposition when I'm listening to this over here. What's going on over here? That sounds kind of weird. I don't know about that, but that other thing that sounds decent. Can you explain that? And then how does that pertain to that thing that seemed kind of weird? Oh, wait a minute. Okay, it's like that. Oh, that doesn't seem so weird then, huh? Wow, that's what people are tripping on. Why don't they know that? Oh, because the leaders don't want them to know that. Oh, okay. That's how the conversation is going, and it's beyond anybody's control. As I mentioned before, the powers of the world, the powers of Earth, have a greater need for us than we have for the powers of the world. It's not a greater than or less than. It's not a better than or worse than. It's not a antagonism. It's not a provocation. It's not instigation. It's a fact. Because again, we let go of life. We are in this life. We are of this life. We are guided to bring forth further life. Yet we've let go of life. And everything we do is for a purpose that's greater than ourselves. It's greater than today. It's greater than now. The powers are very much attached to the earth, very much attached to particularly pleasures and aversions to pain. We still feel pleasure, we still feel pain. We still have those things as well, as we're of this life, but we're comparatively indifferent. So our motivations are different. But the attachment that the powers have towards the materiality and the motivations that powers need to get others to do things is very much attached and needy on the world and materiality. And to sustain what's there, and it's not just one person, it's not one being, it's multitude of factions at each other competing for this. And so in that, kinfolk are also drawing and depending upon others that are different from themselves. And so to continue in each's own game, there's the necessity of reconciliation to some degree with difference, the otherness, the foreignness. And that's where we exist. That's what we teach. That's what we share. That's what we are. And that's where we are needed. By the grace of the Most High. All thanks and praise to the Most High. So that's where things are in this earthly game. So we are less of we are less of life. Powers are greater of life and further attached to life and further needy of the materiality in life. Powers are reliant upon their own adversaries to continue on, and the powers need knowledge and discipline and how to work amidst and away from the adversaries to continue with what they're doing, which means that the powers need us who live in those confluences, need our knowledge, need our company, our presence, our vibration that's beyond words and further. So now all that being said, the powers can cause devastation. The powers can cause much further bloodshed and torture and threats and obstructions than we have capacity for, because that's different from our nature. So we have to respect that and acknowledge that. Again, we're not trying to fight nobody. We're not backing from nobody either. It's a matter of recognizing need. We don't need powers for nothing. Don't need the powers for nothing. We know where the food is. We know how the food is. But when the food is polluted and everything else like that, then we got a tango. And that's not threats, that's overtures. That's actuality. And when the powers are polluting nature and polluting and obstructing life from sustaining itself, the powers are answerable to the one and the oneness. So it's not just the powers versus us, it's the powers versus life itself and the universe. So the powers try to recruit people to get some numbers and advantages in that temptation. Oh, da 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 da. And that's where the lure is. But there is no. The enemy is corruption. The enemy is corruption within ourselves. The enemy is corruption around us. Ultimately, it's ourselves and our own susceptibility towards corruption. And corruption is extremely powerful in this earthly experience. That's the nature of it. It's always this way. There is no outsmarting the devil, and there is no outliving the devil. It's simply living this life. So, are you still with me? Still on it? The powers corruption. All the leaderships ascend through a culture of corruption. It's the nature of the city. Amidst the subordination, as I mentioned before at the beginning, the servitude and everything else, it's corruption. And it's corruption that provides protection against the lawlessness of the jungle, of the wilderness. So people opt into the corruption in order to survive and get a distance and some protection away from the wilderness. And once people are in it, it's the game. Game on. It's game. And the methodology for ascending within the hierarchy of the city of Babylon is corruption. And when the city becomes powerful and influential and established for a number of generations, and the corruption becomes increasingly systemic, then eventually people wake up, people sober up and be like, no, we don't like this. Rebellion, a revolution. And there's the notion of just being honest, not being corrupt. And one of the instincts is to conquer. Because the thing about it, I mean, a lot of this is actually just to reason. Be like, yo, we don't have to be too corrupt. Can we just do this and that? But here's the thing, understand. Corruption does not quit. Corruption does not quit. Corruption is only conquered. So when those who don't want to live within the corruption become self-aware and determined in that respect, one of the further instincts is to endeavor to conquer corruption. But here's the thing. Corruption does not quit. It is only conquest that the tendency is to conquer corruption, to conquer corruption, to overcome corruption. However, the paradox, the actuality is that in that process of conquering corruption, one becomes corruption. The land of the Taino, Cuba, and further. because it's not any particular regime, it's the position. Anybody who presumes that position of control, corruption. That's the futility, and that's the fallacy of that notion of conquering corruption. The solution that we see and that we're taught in terms of dealing it away from or letting go and minimizing corruption is simply distancing ourselves honestly, thoroughly from the things that we observe as corrupt. So plain and simple, that's it. And that involves, generally speaking, through the thousands of years, living a simple life, living a basic life, knowing what one's basic needs are, and how to be diplomatic and negotiate with the conditions of the moment, and how to teach this, how to be in relationship with each other, the Wulun, the 5 relations, particularly husband and wife, and bring new life into this world and teach new life, children, our seeds, our progeny. Teach children these ways and continue it as long as possible. So that's the solution, and it's day after day. Ain't no easy way. So the powers need us further than we need the powers. The powers have greater propensity for affliction, actually, than we do ourselves, for destruction and obstruction, for temptation and threats and torture and all these type of things, than we have. However, there are realms beyond the power's control. Beyond the control of the powers, there are realms. There are places, there are phenomena, there are beings beyond the control of the powers that are infinite to the aggregate and the ultimate of the powers. Those phenomena, those realms, those beings, those properties exist beyond our control. It's not us doing it. There is a knowledge about relationship and the workings of these phenomena, the workings of the Most High, and how this affects the powers of the world. It's other than our doing. We don't snap a finger and make it happen. It's not our will. We can't will this. It's a matter of our understanding. You can say overstanding, we say understanding, because we're humble. That is what it is. And so that is what we share. Amidst the political conditions of today here on this land, in the theater of the United States, the political theater of the United States, there is an observation. Amidst the corruption, the ancients teach us how the corruption of society arrives into a realm where it sacrifices its own children. That simply shows the deterioration of mindfulness to the point where people sacrifice their own children, knowingly, willfully. The severity of suffering and disease within the mind and body and heart and spirit of society, where people kill people's own children. What else is life about when one has children? So, what we observe in the conditions today is the different ways that these sacrifices are conducted. What we observe is that, generally speaking, liberals, let's say conservatives first, conservatives primarily sacrifice their sons, and liberals primarily sacrifice their daughters. Conservatives sacrifice the sons in terms of going to war, being ready to go to war, and putting sons on the front lines of doing that war, whether it's on a foreign country in battlefronts or whether it's on the streets or otherwise. Liberals sacrificing daughters in terms of sexual promiscuity, participating in a culture of sexual deviance, sexual deviation, depravity, and the willingness of introducing the daughters into that, not directly necessarily, and not molesting the daughters directly, but leading daughters into and turning a blind eye to the promiscuity of the daughters, because the men are having sex with the daughters of others. So, and again, the corruptions simply amalgamate, increase, and become compounded, and the malaise and the dis-ease compounded as well. So there's further with that. At the moment, I'm straining, like, not necessarily to concentrate, but I'm straining to remember some of these joints that are shared before. And again, it's Juma at this point. So rather than going through that process for the next 2-3 hours, it's beneficial to wrap this up at some point soon, very soon, and continue on with prayers, because that's one of the solutions, and that's one of the things I'm distanced from. I'll get to that, I guess, at this point. So where we are, again, the whole mixed heritage thing. One, share the notion of mixed roots, mixed roads, and mixed reasoning. Mixed reality. We've already said a blessing, to be honest, actually. But within this this recent static between black folk and mixed folk, understand, first of all, mixed folk are, how do I put this? They're all different types of mixed folk, just like they're all different types of black folk. The black folk who are clapping at mixed folk and talking out of pocket about who mixed folk are, those black folk are not all black folk. Those black folk are not the majority of black folk. Those black folk are a minority, some of whom are propped up, some of whom are just young and ignorant, and otherwise. But we know that there is love in the black community for mixed people, and always has been, always will be, by the grace of the Most High. We know that, we live that, we experience that, we share that, we are that. So that's unquestioned, that's untouched and untouchable, regardless of all the manipulations, the puppets and puppetry and everything. So, but that being said, all that being said, there's still the effects of those vocal ignorance ignorances that affect conditions. And we do, as we experience black love, we also experience black betrayal. And there is, at this point, when people, it's one thing to call oneself out, it's other things to call our ancestors in addition, because it's not just us. It's disrespect to our ancestors, and it's disrespect to the people's own ancestors who are doing that. And it's like, we just, no, okay, fine. Whatever your club is, have it. Have your club. Be that. We do our own thing. And recognize that you don't have ownership over what we do either. You don't have ownership of what we claim, who we roll with, and additionally. And if you want to claim ownership of culture or otherwise, again, out of pocket, because the kinfolk you're going to be calling on is our kinfolk too. So recognize that. Anyways, all that being said, what we observe at this moment is then this. They put it like this: when black folk do us like white folk do us, in terms of you're not us, and if you want to be us, then you have to be less than. We already know that's how white folk do mixed folk. We already know that. When black folk do that to mixed folk, then black folk have to do black folk like mixed folk do white folk, which means, oh, now there's a border. We got to keep our guard up because we don't know about you. No, we're not cool like that. I don't know you. In our walk. Now that's a general thing. And again, there's all different types of mixed folk. Just like there's all different types of black folk and there's all different types of white folk. And yes, mixed folk ain't perfect. Mixed folk done bullshit on black folk for, we could say, hundreds of years. We could say thousands of years, depending upon how much people know about their history. Most people who's ignorant don't know about their history, so don't even talk about that. Don't even drop them gems of self-knowledge until kinfolk are ready and respectful. So, yes, mixed folk have done dirt in South Africa, in the United States, in Europe, and otherwise. That don't mean you throw the whole group out under the bus, because it haven't been everybody. Mixed folk gone through sufferation too. Mixed folk know the lingo too. Mixed folk walk the alleys too, and the streets, and the jails too. Mixed folk are lurking behind the masks and the presumptions. So, all types, all different types. Our type, we love everybody. And again, that's our type, our specific discipline. We love everybody. The cats who throw shade at us. The cats who throw gaslight at us. We love everybody. That's our walk. We don't tolerate everything. We don't tolerate everything everybody does. But we love everybody. And that's not all mixed folk. Can't say for all mixed folk. That's us. And we connected with mixed folk who don't love everybody. Just like black folk are connected with black folk who don't love everybody. Mixed folk do tend to be further mindful of diplomacy and what mixed folk say, because mixed folk are aware that mixed folk, by and large, historically speaking, in many ways are civilizationally out of pocket to do that, because it's ultimately very much against the nature of being mixed. If we're gonna vilify any particular ethnic group, we vilify ourselves because we are those selves. So we have to be further judicious and discriminating in how we apply our vitriol, and thus it tends to be further towards behavior rather than roots and ethnicity. And when we see people call kinfolk white devil for doing this thing right here, raping, pillaging, and murdering, but then don't say black devil when it's black folk who are doing the same raping, pillaging, and murdering, then we say bullshit. And that's truth. And we know a lot of kinfolk, even within our fold, even within Rastafari, aren't ready to Recognize that and be honest about that. We know that because it's painful. And it requires stability in this life to be able to have that strength. And as much as many kinfolk may want that, want to be that, many kinfolk have yet to be in that position. And so that's not hating, but at the same time, we gotta keep a distance. Because when we only call out down pressure when certain people do it and not when other people do that, then that's not truth. That's not the Most High. That's not the teachings of His Majesty either. So again, we try not to be all the divisiveness or whatever else, but at the same time we have to distance because it's not safe. It's not safe. And it's just, we love, but recognize cats is caught up in their thing, and we got to be distant. So when black folk do us like white folk do us, then we have to do black folk like we do white folk, and just keep up that distance. And now we gotta vet you to see what you about, because we know black folk there are many black folk who are very quick to sell out black folk. You know that scene. And there are many black folk who are very knowledgeable about black culture and even somewhat of black history, to have some semblance of credibility and influence and in leading others into betraying other black folk, prostituting culture, prostituting people, and otherwise. And such black folk and black leaders have that capacity of, when being challenged on it, white people are going to challenge because they say, "Oh yeah, no, he's pimping their culture. He's pimping their people. Why don't stop that? No. Let that ride." But when mixed folk call it out, "Oh, he's a sellout. He's hateful. What does he know? Pickney, mulatto, half caste, whatever, bullshit." So that's okay. We keep on going, and we keep on organizing. So that's what we focus on. Well, that was a little bit of a rant when I was intending to go into the solution. Solution again is land. If you're not talking about land, you're talking about slavery, plain and simple. You're talking about game, and you're talking about being further comfortable and further well positioned within an experience of a slavery. You gotta talk about land, or otherwise you're talking about slavery, plain and simple. Any economics, any politics, whatever, land or slavery. And land doesn't necessarily have to be ownership of land, but some type of arrangement where your sovereignty is acknowledged, respected, and supported on that land. Otherwise, it's slavery. Plain and simple. That land, you could be living in a mansion and have deeds and titles even. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but what our solution is securing land, and at the very least, at the very moment, an area of land, village, residence, school, a sanctuary, a refuge for mixed people to be mixed people, for multiculturalism to be multiculturalism, mixed people to be mixed people, where people can visit for a day, visit for a weekend, visit for a week, visit for a year, study, learn, sing, listen, talk, reason, in a multitude of languages with own kinfolk about self, about ancestry, about history, about today, about politics, about economics, about religiosity and spirit, creator, all our relations, and otherwise, a place, a physical place where people have memories and take those memories with kinfolk as they travel on these roads of creation, and wherever kinfolk settle on this earth, in this universe, in this life, knowing there's at least one sanctuary where we can be this way. And from that sanctuary, connect, network, communitize, communitize. So that's what we are continue to work on. That's what we continue to focus on. There's further. We're gonna leave it at that because it's Juma and it's already been half an hour since I said we're gonna pray. We're gonna pray. And we're going to continue by the grace of the Most High. Black woman, beautiful woman, natural woman, sovereign woman, holy woman, spiritual woman, respect, support, encouragement, guidance. That doesn't clean up what I say before. It doesn't excuse what I say before. If any perceive the necessity of what I say before needing some type of excuse or apology or repentance, we understand that rationale, and in response, we encourage kinfolk to process beyond the vulgarity, beyond the crassness, beyond the flippantness and seeming disrespect. Recognize what is being said. Recognize the truth amidst all the foibles and the clumsiness and the ego and everything else. Recognize the truth. Recognize the actuality of citizenship. Recognize the atrocities that are being committed at this very moment. How many people are being killed at this very moment by the United States? How many people are being threatened? How many people are having their streets and their homes invaded by the United States military? Men with machine guns and uniforms. Drones flying over. Detonating bombs. Threatening bombs. Planes flying over. Intimidating just by the engine sound. Don't know if it's going to be a bomb today or not. Understanding the United States is not just the United States, but its coalitions, NATO, the United Nations and otherwise, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist and otherwise. It's a world system. How much is the world system killing and raping today? And understand that your volitional, proactive allegiance and relationship and leadership as a citizen is responsible and accountable. That's what we're talking about. And it's nasty. Very few want to talk about it. And when people don't talk about it, hide away from it, predators lurk and feed off of the hiding, off the negligence. That's what we're talking about. We shared before a narrative of world, earth, creation. To today, we talk about the garden and two places on this earth where the garden exists to our knowledge. Along the equator, where the vegetation perennially grows most readily, naturally, organically. Africa and the southern part of this hemisphere, the rainforest. The evidence of history of the Eastern Hemisphere shows a migration from Africa through Ethiopia, through Egypt, into Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, and then onwards to other locations. Further east to India, the Indus civilization, and further east into Southeast Asia, and then also further north and northeast around the Tibetan Plateau into Manchuria, and migration circling in that vicinity, and then further north into Europe, Alps, Scandinavia, and along the seas, eventually thoroughly through Anatolia and Iberia. So that is the natural migration that history shows us, that we're shown through other means. Rooted still within the heart, within the heights, within the heat of Africa. Now, in that migration, in that sequence, their narration becomes multifold. There are a number of different versions and understandings and interpretations, and part of our task in this life from this era continuing is reconciling all these. One of the teachings, one of the guidances is that in this process, beings emerge in this life from the heavens, from the celestial, angelic beings as well as demonic beings at any place in the geography. We are also taught about the commingling of celestial beings and earthly beings. We can talk about the Nephilim as well. And there are beings that races of beings that emerge from these unions. And that's something to reconcile continually. There are different natures, there are different narratives, but amidst all this, there is a oneness. There's a foundation and there's a rootedness, and that rootedness is constant. The nature of that rootedness is constant, continually reaching back into the depths of Africa, the depths of the warmth, the heart. That is the Ajvata as well. So there are tremendous miracles and benefits and blessings that exist within the whiteness. There are tremendous miracles and benevolence and blessings that exist within the blackness. And there are further infinite miracles and blessings and benefits and beauty in the sharing, in the reconciling. Everybody ain't got to be everything. But one way or another, we got to be together. So, particularly when we want to take from what others perceive to have, then best believe you got to be together. So if when kinfolk want to be black, when kinfolk want to be black, and let go of the things that are not black, and don't hate on the things that are not black, because true black, pure black, don't slack. And if you want to be white, be pure white, be true white, don't hate black. Because true white, pure white is all right. Is that enough? Is that close? Close enough? That's what we're going to share for the moment. That endeavor of the Mixed Heritage Retreat Center, the Mixed Heritage Sanctuary, the Mixed Heritage Refuge, the Mixed Heritage Kutuhus, the Mixed Heritage Refugee Camp, the Mixed Heritage intentional community, the Mixed Heritage Village, the Mixed Heritage Schoolhouse. We draw from a line from a popular film from 40 years ago, 40 years ago, called The Field of Dreams. In the Field of Dreams, there is a line. If you build it, they will come. So when we look at, and we become our Mixed Heritage community, civilization. This is the line. This is a line. It's not if you build it, they will come. That's not it. The brethren in that scenario already had land, so to speak, in probably Lakota or Ojibwe land, but he already had his deed and title, so he wasn't worried about land. He was worried about what to do with that land. So he built a baseball diamond, hoping that the ancestors return. Ha. That's not what we're doing. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is this. We're talking about, like I said, a space, a place to be mixed heritage. Sharing songs and stories, rituals, ethics, reasoning. A place for people to be people's own selves, to speak people's own languages, to learn people's own languages, to talk about history, ancestors, get further acquainted in our relations, further peaceful and healthy with nature, knowledgeable about the calendars and the movement, our relations and our rhythms, a place to do this. And there's the methodology of negotiating with governments and getting some kind of land grant and diplomacy. There's the methodology of raising money and making a purchase conventionally. There's a methodology of taking sledgehammers and going to the streets where we're at today and just claiming it. There's the methodology of squatting and just setting up. But this is what we look at this moment. It's not if you build it, they will come. It is this. When we become it, they will build. So that's what we focus on. Becoming this way as much as possible. Completing this last big project, God willing, and immersing myself and ourselves in the culture, the mixed heritage culture, as much as possible. There are details, there are specifics. The Mixed Kinvolk are doing many things at this moment. There's the benefit of organization. There's benefit of supporting each other. And at the same time, many mixed people are on the margins, between like the haves and the have-nots, the elite and the proletariat. And in that position of the margins, there's always this leverage thing of wanting. It's difficult to be authoritative without being called out and devalued. And so from the experience of the streets and being called out from the underclass, I guess we can talk like that, overclass and underclass. From the underclass respect, communicating to mixed folk, like mixed folk who roll with us, there's susceptibilities, but at the same time there are protections and assurances. We're not gangster any further than anybody else is. But we do have backup, and we do have the propensity of calling things out and not backing down from bullies, whatever color they is and whatever status along the spectrum they is. So mixed folk have a necessity for that type of backing and that type of support and foundation. But it's beneficial in the same time for there to be mutuality and recognition and communication accordingly as well, because it's not a it, even our backup, even us having people's back, particularly mixed people's back, it's beyond our own doing. Like there has to be a recognition, there has to be a support, there has to be respect, because again, too many kinfolk are too quick to sell other kinfolk out to get a better position within the experience of enslavement. So we're less available to that scenario. We also have the connects within the overclass as well, because even though being gray listed, black listed, white listed, or whatever in the overclass and in the underclass, the truth within our trod has influence within the trenches and within the institutions, and within the hierarchies all around. And again, it's not our doing, it's all the grace of the Most High. It's the nature of things, and it's cultivated through our discipline, it's cultivated through our studies, it's cultivated through our prayer and meditation that we're supposed to be doing at this moment. So all that being said, a lot of kinfolk who are doing things dolo, young people, YouTubers, social media, and additionally new podcasts, old podcasts, and otherwise, writers, publishers, artists, musicians, and otherwise who are doing their own thing, and using their own personal connects to do their thing at this moment. But at the same time, recognizing, there's still leverage. There's still this necessity of attachment and this, that, and the other, and susceptibility towards, don't know how long we can ride this wave at the moment. What we're saying is that we have ways and means, righteous and discipline, principle for stability. It's not the flash. It's not celebrity. It's not da per se. There are celebrity connects and everything, but that's not what it's about. So anyways, when mixed kinfolk are able to decode this, decipher what I'm saying, when mixed kinfolk are able to or have the inclination of guiding livelihood into a viably sustainable, genuine, and modest regularity and stability. I might have said stable twice. That's how stable it is. When mixed folk are ready to be mixed folk and to be committed to being mixed folk and to committed to practicing a livelihood, to doing work, practicing a vocation, an occupation that genuinely supports one's mixed heritage, we invite kinfolk to holler at us and build with us. We're not talking about I have no bank account. We're not talking about we got money to do this and the other. That's not what it's about. It's a matter of working together and us sharing what we do have, the influence that we do have, that supports you to do what you do, the genuine work that you do, further, longer, further efficient, further productive, further fruitful. So, and that particularly involves drawing from other mixed kinfolk and working together collectively. Because again, as I mentioned before in a previous joint, we observe that the world, the natural world, has a natural aversion towards mixedness. It's a natural thing to be averse towards it. And that aversion is severe. It is a severe aversion. It's relenting and relenting and relenting within recent generations, but it is still severe. And much of that relenting is often with a pretense of, okay, well, we'll accept you, but as long as you know you're still less than this, or you're still this, or just as long as you don't do that. All these qualifications and requirements that suppress the actual existence of the being, the transcendental nature, the ancestral heritage of a person. And people can get paid, people can get big houses, people can have children, people can send children to college, and additionally, in those woeful compromises. But there is a limit. So, amidst those severities, what we're talking about is working together, and in our cooperation, cultivating system, cultivating, I'm trying to think of a natural way of describing this, a circle, cultivating a culture amidst the severities of the different cultures, the homogenous cultures, that is natural, but making space for ourselves, for us to be ourselves. And in doing that, recognizing that that involves letting a lot of the luxuries go, letting a lot of the things of how we used to value ourselves based upon what other people taught us, even what our parents taught us. To let those things go, because those just lead to further devaluations of ourselves. So many mixed people are involved in imperialism and attached to imperialism and complaining about imperialism just to have a further comfortable position within imperialism. So it's not necessarily a matter of letting all go entirely of imperialism. Me recording this is attached to imperialism in many respects, but at the same time, it is letting go a lot of things that are not necessary. A lot of just the superficial aesthetics that are keeping kinfolk in chains, and knowing how to let that go, and then what to trade for. It's always trade, one way or the other. Even when things are taken from us, we're being traded with something, whether that's peace of mind or otherwise. So it's a matter of coordinating our exchanges in conjunction with each other, attuning our relations, our daily activities, and what we prioritize, and attuning our rhythms of our gatherings and our events, our celebrations, and additionally our rituals, attuning that so it's further supportive of ourselves, so that when we do have children, we do marry, when we do have children, in that order, and when we do have family and build community, we're doing it in a way that is increasingly conducive to the well-being of the next generation, of our progeny. So rather than just saying, well, I'm just trying to get as much money as I can, get a nice house and a quiet place and with a nice school system, and then just stack up chips to pay the tuition so that my child can go to university and then they can fend for themselves. No, because in that process, you're not teaching your child about themselves sufficiently, proficiently. And in that process, there is a separation that occurs. And in that process, the child becomes a high school graduate, a university graduate, and lost even further than the generation at this moment. So recognize that ain't a solution. The solution is thoroughly living a mixed heritage way, whatever your mixed heritage is and whatever your comfort zone is, and teaching your child that, and recognizing that an optimal way of doing that is working with other people who are mixed heritage. And that can be people who are homogenous, who are straight up white, straight up black, or otherwise. However, people who genuinely support mixed heritageness, seeing the kinfolk with Afropean and the brethren in Europe, and how Africans can readily embrace mixed heritage kinfolk with a shared experience of being of African heritage in a Eurocentric environment. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a nascent thing. So it's a matter of cultivating and recognizing respect. Respect each one for what each one is, and others respecting us for who we are and supporting us for who we are. Again, a place. There's the necessity of a place. And if it's migratory, if it's moving from place to place, that's what it is. And in that process, wherever place we are, let it be known, respect. And it's not just about us. It's about the world. Like, disrespecting us is disrespecting the world that supplies whoever's doing the disrespect. But then it's just also ultimately truth and the Most High Elohim. Disrespecting any self is disrespect against the self. Acknowledging and criticizing behavior, that's righteousness, and we can reason about that and be willing to learn and be willing to teach. The best way to teaching, example, quietness, honesty. compassion, modesty, and gratitude. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace, and Rastafari.